I'm Professor Sweeney. I'm the coordinator of the Creative Writing Program. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, especially because I know for you students that this is a very busy week right after fall break with midterms. It's almost like midterms 2, or son of midterms or something like that. And then there's family weekend. But I think you'll be very, very glad that you came. I'm not actually going to introduce our visiting writer yet. In fact, I'm not going to introduce him at all. Someone else is going to do that. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background information. So if you've come to some of our other events in the Working Writers series, this is our fourth event already this year. And all the other ones have been readings where the writer reads work to you, and then you can ask questions. You can still ask questions tonight, but this is a special event that we have once a year. It's called the Vocation of the Writer lecture. And the Vocation of the Writer lecturer will not only read work to you, but will also talk about what it means to have a vocation as a writer. Like, why would you do that? How would you decide you wanted to do it? Once you did decide, how would you practice it? And also, this is not only about being a writer, it's about having a vocation. It's about deciding what you want to do. And as you know, this is sort of like a time when you're starting to feel the pressure to decide what you want to do. And what that means is you have to figure out what it is that you want to do. So I hope that you'll not only enjoy hearing about his amazing work, which relates to all sorts of issues in American history and race and regionality, and how we make sense of it, how we're still making sense of it, but also how you choose to do that kind of work. I'm still not mentioning him yet by name, but his book is out there for sale on Bedlam Books, which is a wonderful bookstore right near Polar Park, is bringing books to each of our readings. There are some books by creative writing faculty, and there's some books by other writers in our series. So, welcome again, and I will now welcome more specifically Professor Leila Phillip, and she is the one who's going to introduce W. Ralph Eubanks. So I said his name, but you're not introduced yet.
All right. Okay, well, we'll try to just get going here. Can everybody hear okay in the back? If anybody can't, let me know, okay? Okay, well, we're going to be really treated to hear from this wonderful book, and as Beth has pointed out, Professor Sweeney, books are for sale, and there'll be book signing after. So I just want to say very quickly a few things about what we're going to be. Come on in, we're just getting started. What we're going to experience tonight to set up the event. So we're really honored to have W. Ralph Eubanks with us, and thank you to the McFarland Center, thank you to Creative Writing and other co-sponsors for making this happen. He comes to us today from University of Mississippi, a long way to travel in one day. He's the author of several award-winning books, highly acclaimed, and in addition, he's written for the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, American Scholar, New Yorker, Wired. I could go on, National Public Radio. In 2023, he was honored with the Mississippi Governor Arts Award for Literary Excellence, and he's received a number of very important fellowships, including from the Guggenheim Foundation, the New America Foundation, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. But I want to talk a little bit about his works to give you some context. Daddy, what is Mississippi like? In the now famous prologue to his 2003 memoir, Ever is a Long Time, Eubanks sets up this innocent yet complex bedtime question of his young son as the starting point of what becomes the book's central journey and investigation, a journey that for Eubanks will lead him to wrestle ultimately with questions of homeland, identity, memory, and place. And as he unpacks these deeply felt and complex social and cultural layers of past and present Mississippi, he engages another deeply felt and central question. How is it possible to explain his abiding love for a place so full of suffering? And instead of shying away from what he calls the awful truths of this place, he uses them to further see and know and explore and grapple with understandings. And it is this clarity of vision and honesty and compassion that has marked his work and really marked him as a writer. In his 2009 book, The House at the End of the Road, Eubanks further explores his very personal connection with the past and present of Mississippi by recounting how 3 generations of his interracial family have survived amidst the politics of racial identity in the South from the Jim Crow era to the present. And now in his most recent book, A Place Like Mississippi, which I think we're going to be treated to some images from tonight and discussion about, he continues this work in a fascinating amalgam of cultural exploration and autobiography. And it's made more potent with powerful photographs and images. And as Eubanks travels through the state, focusing on writers he admires, both Black and white alike, he challenges our inclination to view the South as a monolith. He reminds us that not only is it the case that geography is fate, but that on a completely different level, there exists a kind of geography of the imagination. And for Eubanks, most certainly this geography of the imagination is his beloved Mississippi. And while a larger theme in all of his writing is the ways in which, in many ways, Mississippi is, as he would say, the South writ large, and even America today writ large, it is the complexity of this diverse place with this giant river running through it, the Mississippi, that he wants us to see in all its complexity and texture. This afternoon, in a really wonderful craft talk and conversation, he recounted an anecdote in which, on more than one occasion, people have asked him why he's a nonfiction writer, and he joked that he doesn't have to make anything up, he's from Mississippi. But on a more serious note, he was encouraging all of us to think about writing about place as not just a site of material, but as a way of seeing, as a way of thinking, as a way of feeling. I think it is this deep sense of place that marks his work profoundly and is deeply fascinating, and we're going to hear about tonight. As I reread his work tonight in preparation, this week in preparation for tonight, I was amazed once again by the beauty of his language, by that alchemy which is a writer thinking in language. His sentences carry us along in this book. It starts to seem as if we are journeying on a river ourselves. We stop in slack pools of information. We're in eddies of visual, visceral kind of experiences of landscape, but all of it carried along by a deep current of thought and understanding. So it's my great pleasure to introduce W. Ralph Eubanks. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Layla, for that really wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me here at the College of the Holy Cross to deliver the Vocation of the Writer Lecture. I have to say it's a strange feeling being asked to speak about how you approach writing as a vocation. But being asked to talk about this has made me, I would say it's really forced me, to look deeply into my past and to think about what are the signs there that actually made me a writer. And one of the things that it has done is it's made me realize that there are really three things, I think, that probably shaped me as a writer and placed me on the pathway to being a storyteller. And the first one of these is this little ranch house on 80 acres where I grew up in rural Mississippi, around a sharp curve of a long, spiraling stretch of blacktop. My father was a county agent, so he worked with farmers. My mother was a teacher, and we grew everything that we ate on this farm, giving us a measure of independence. There was also a real sense of solidarity with others in our community, and that is my hometown. That's the street of my hometown. That shadow, long shadow there is me in that photograph. But we not only grew everything that we ate, we gave a lot of our food away. And my father intentionally grew more than we could eat because he wanted to share our abundance with people in Mississippi who at that time had a lot less than we had. My three sisters and I grew up in a very self-contained world, one that sheltered us from the turmoil that was taking place in Mississippi during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. We lived in what I would describe as loving isolation. I never felt lonely or separated from the world. But living with a measure of distance from the broader society in my small town, kind of far away from those little town streets, really sparked a curiosity about what lay beyond the borders of the place where I grew up in small town Mississippi. But my parents created this place for us where we could grow up in a way that we did not feel defined by the blatant racism that existed in Mississippi during that time. Now, the second thing that really shaped me was reading, and mostly books from the bookmobile from the Pine Forest Regional Library. We had a small library in our house, and at its core was a set of Compton's encyclopedias and a 12-volume series called My Bookhouse, which was American but very British in its sensibilities. The first volume was largely nursery rhymes, fables, and fairy tales, many of them German, or Märchen, as I learned that they were called from my Encyclopedia auf Deutsch. And then in the 12th volume, we were introduced to the works of Shakespeare and the Canterbury Tales, which probably explains why I studied British rather than American literature at university. But the bookmobile introduced me to so many other different books and genres beyond my bookhouse. Whatever they did not have on the physical shelves of the bookmobile, I could ask for, and it would be brought to my house down that blacktop road the very next week. The books I ordered specially from the bookmobile were often ones that I discovered in a publication called My Weekly Reader, which maybe a few of you in the audience tonight remember what that was. And I got that every week in school. And the books that I remember the most are Across 5 Aprils, Johnny Tremain, My Side of the Mountain. One summer, I read every Agatha Christie mystery on the bookmobile shelf. And the summer I turned 11, I read William Faulkner's The Reivers, because I'd read that a movie was being made of the book, and the main character was my age. It was the first book that I ever read by a Mississippi writer. And it was the first hint that someone from my part of the world could also become a writer. Now, the third thing is a little bit odd. The third thing that contributed to my writing was this mailbox, which stood directly across the road from my house. At the age of 10, I began writing letters to pen pals in England, Australia, and New Zealand. I requested names of my correspondents from an organization called the English-Speaking Union in New York. They sent the name of your pen pal on a postcard, and American children wrote the first letter. The response always came on these pale blue aerograms bearing the profile of Queen Elizabeth, which seemed exotic and exciting each time I opened the mailbox and found one, and then carefully peeled open their lightly glued flaps to read them. From these various correspondences, I learned of the world my isolation made me so curious about. And my pen friends, and that is a name that the British used for me, learned about Mississippi from me. I began explaining what Mississippi was like in those letters beginning at age 10 or 11. These letters held descriptions of my farm, my school, rural life, and answered questions that my pen friends had about Mississippi specifically. And those were numerous in the 1960s and 70s. Their world seemed exotic to me, as did mine to them. An 1876 British guide to epistolary etiquette advised that a letter should be regarded not merely as a medium for the communication of intelligence, but a letter is also a work of art. I was not aware of this adage at that age, but I can tell you that I would draft my responses to these letters and very carefully craft them. I think this is where I learned to edit my own work by reading it aloud. And it is also where I began to connect with the place where I was from. Since in these letters, I had to describe the landscape, the streets, and the roads all around my rural locale, and I had to describe Mississippi itself. My British correspondents, as I said, had many questions about Mississippi, and in each letter, I sought to answer them. Writing letters gave me a degree of intimacy with Mississippi, the place. Now, to become intimate with the place you are from, you have to realize how much the place affects every part of your life, including the way you see the world. Although I grew up in Mississippi on a farm in this very rural setting, that is my crazy dog Blondie, who used to chase rocks in a pond that was near our house. As soon as I could, I left Mississippi and the South. First to wander to England, where I finally met my pen friend Gordon Watson, and Ireland, and then to live in the North, first in Michigan during my graduate school years, and then for nearly 40 years in Washington, D.C. If someone were to ask me what stands at the center of my writing, I would have to say it is a search for home. And there is no need to go looking for a place to call home unless you are lost. Although I've had this very amazingly lucky and happy life, I have been lost in ways that no map could ever assist me. In the years after I left Mississippi, when I thought I'd shed my southern skin and my accent, yes, this is all an affectation, I felt the place tugging at me as I walked city streets in DC and New York, asking me to come back. It was not until well into middle age that I answered the siren call to return. And where I went to was back to that spot in Mississippi where I grew up. And the moment that I sat down on the very same patch of land where I'm sitting right there that I came from, and I got there because the house had been flattened by a tornado a decade before. Nothing was there. It was all gone. I came to realize that both the place I had run to and the place I had run from were both home. One was a place I had constructed for myself to feel at ease in the world, and the other was my true spiritual home, even though the place still puzzled me. Both the North and the South are part of me, but Mississippi left its mark on me, affecting what I saw in the world, as well as how I felt about what I saw. In time, I learned that Mississippi can never be escaped. It leaves an invisible tattoo on your soul that can never be removed. When my two very tattooed young sons recently urged me to add some ink to my body, I told them that it was unnecessary. I already have a tattoo. You just can't see it. But it does come across on the page. Now I have returned to the South, and at least for part of the year, to teach writing and literature and to write. As I've learned since my return, there can never be a full repatriation to the place you once called home once you've left. A divided sense of self becomes a part of your identity. Part of returning home is accepting a feeling of exile amidst the familiar. One of the ways I found to cope with my feelings of displacement is to reconnect with Mississippi, the place, its geography, its literature, and its history. Seeking to understand the place I am from has become a spiritual necessity. Writing about the South as a place, and specifically Mississippi, has made me feel less loss, both emotionally and spiritually. I'm certain there are other writers who feel the same way about the places where they are from. But the South is different because Southerners feel the need to explain the place they are from. When I say that writing has become a spiritual necessity, it's not an exaggeration or a statement filled with hyperbole. During my 66 years on this planet and living in this country, I have witnessed an extraordinary amount of change. I have extraordinarily vivid memories of the civil rights movement and of the people from that movement who led that movement. And I'm a direct beneficiary of the marches, voter registration drives, the paying of poll taxes, an action that my parents and their friends did for people who could not pay the amount of a poll tax. And for these small pieces of resistance to an unfair system, my family was spied upon by the state of Mississippi during the civil rights movement. So the past is not just history, it's also very deeply personal. As I see the changes and progress of the civil rights movement diminished in American memory, in the political life and laws of this country, and in some places where they cannot even be taught or talked about unless through a framing of American exceptionalism, as a writer, I feel I cannot remain silent. Today, I see the same smear tactics that were used to diminish civil rights workers in the past, tarnishing the work of contemporary voting rights advocates and public school teachers. What I have embraced as part of my vocation as a writer is to urge my readers to understand the past that shaped me and my generation, and why the progress we experienced cannot and must not be stripped away. But to pursue that part of my vocation, I have had to dig deep into Mississippi and into the place itself. Eudora Welty once said, "Place opens a door in the mind." It has become a spiritual necessity for me to understand the place I am from and to get others to understand it as well, as ideas about race, politics, and income inequality that began in Mississippi creep into the rest of the country. While many of you may think that Mississippi is a world unto itself, one that has nothing to do with the rest of the country, what I seek to do in my writing is for my readers to see my home state not as the South writ large, but as America writ large. To do that, I must explore Mississippi as a place and situate it within the realities of its past and with an eye toward how the progress that has been made in my lifetime is slowly being whittled away everywhere and not just in Mississippi. Writing with a sense of place is often seen as the domain of Southern writers, particularly white Southern writers, because of that need to explain. Unfortunately, the literary world often conflates Southernness with whiteness. But place and the search for home have long stood at the core of much of African American writing. Black people are shaped just as much by the places they are from as the cultural forces that shape blackness itself. Whether you are writing about the urban North or the rural South, it is important to give readers a sense of where they are and where you come from. Over the years, I've learned that to write about place, first you must understand the nuances of the place you are writing about and seek to live in that place as thoughtfully as you possibly can. Describe its geography. Tell about the people who live there. And capture the unique voices of those people. As I mentioned this afternoon, you need to create your own archive of the place. Whether these are notes and impressions you collect in a notebook, or voices that you capture in an interview. As a visual person, photographs really become part of the archive that I create, since I often need a reminder of what a place looked like on a particular day or a particular time of day. Next, I feel you need to imprint a visual image of the place on the mind of your reader. Describe as many details as you can about the place. For example, what I remember the most about the first time I visited Mississippi's famous Parchment Farm Penitentiary was the color of the sky. It was the same color as a bruise. At the time, there was a rash of violent activity at the prison, and I came to associate that sky above Parchment with violence, leading me to describe the sky as bruise-colored, and the land itself as a wound on the landscape of the Mississippi Delta. Then bear in mind that place has an ongoing and lasting impact on human experience, including how you see the world. Explain to your readers how a particular place helps you understand other places. Tell how that place has changed and evolved over time. And then what you have to do next is you have to try as hard as you can not to wander off into the land of nostalgia. As a writer who blends memoir with social history, I realize that there is a tendency to wax nostalgic when writing about memory. Yet over the years, I found the tendency to be maudlin about the past can be avoided by asking honest questions about a memory. I always say that a good memoirist should never trust their memory. Ask piercing questions about those memories and seek to expose the truth that time simply allows memories to be polished up and varnished and looked at through a gauzy lens. And very often those questions can be answered by thinking long and hard about a place and other things that happened there, and not just the ones that you choose to remember fondly. And that is the power of using place as an archive. If you dig deep, just as you would if you were going through a series of boxes in a physical archive, the truth is often revealed. What I seek to make part of my vocation as a writer and to fulfill my spiritual necessity to write is to use archives as the source that can help make and create narrative connections that push readers toward truth about people in a place. But it was while I was working on my book, A Place Like Mississippi, that I began to think about place as an archive itself. This took me way beyond print records and ephemera that I would find in those dusty archive boxes that I love going through so much. And it took me out onto the roads of Mississippi to engage with the cultural memory of the state's writers and the ways that they have layered those ideas over the landscape itself. If one begins to think about the land, its geography, and the provenance of that land, it becomes an actual source rather than simply a narrative setting. When I learned to use place as an archival source, I came to realize that while researching place, with your insights and observations, you're creating your own archive. What you see becomes layered over what others have imprinted on the same landscape. And I would say, in fact, I owe the entire narrative structure of A Place Like Mississippi to both a place and a poem about that place. And that is the place right there, which is, this is where Mississippi Highway 49 intersects with Route 90 at the Gulf Coast. You think you're at the end of Mississippi, but I contend that the Gulf Coast is not the end of Mississippi, it's actually the beginning. So most Mississippians do look at the Gulf Coast as the end. And the reason is because of two very important storms there, Camille and Katrina. And I remember them both. Camille was while I was living there, Katrina while I was away from there and had just been on that Gulf Coast just 3 weeks before. So this is where the highway's terminus at the Gulf of Mexico marks the beginning of Mississippi. And one of the main reasons I think we look at as the end is because you're going out away from the South. You're going into another world, but it's really the beginning. But in the popular imagination, the Mississippi Delta is the place that looms larger than life, since it stores the shores of the state's mighty river that gives the state its name. And it also inspired the musical art form known as the blues. But it is because of those life-altering storms, Katrina and Camille, that we see how Mississippi can be remade, reshaped, and transformed. Natasha Trethewey's theories of time and space made me realize that I had to begin the story of Mississippi's literary landscape on the Gulf Coast. And here is what Trethewey says about this spot in her poem. She says, "You can get there from here, though there is no going home. Everywhere you go will be somewhere you've never been. Try this. Head south on Mississippi 49, one by one, mile markers ticking off another minute of your life. Follow this to its natural conclusion. Dead end at the coast. The pier at Gulfport, where riggings of shrimp boats are loose stitches in a sky threatening rain." This is an example of how place served as an archive. I went to this spot on the Gulf Coast when I began to write A Place Like Mississippi. And with the inspiration for the narrative structure of the book coming from that drive that I took through the rest of the state, through Natchez and Vicksburg, through my native piney woods, through Jackson, through the eastern hills of Mississippi that border the state of Alabama, through hill country around Oxford, where I spend 9 months out of the year, and finally into the Mississippi Delta. Theories of time and space was echoing in my head as I made that trip. And I have to say that I owe a great deal to that poem for letting me know that there was a specific place I should travel to and write about. When I saw that spot, what I saw in that spot came to be layered on what Trethewey saw herself and what she felt on that very spot, giving me a new source for writing about a particular place. For a book about Mississippi writers and their relationship to the landscape, I learned that I needed to follow the instincts of individual writers about the places that shaped them. That meant traveling to those places and spaces to see how the real and imagined sometimes blend together. And these places became my archival sources. Now, currently, I am at work on a book on the Mississippi Delta. And the book has the working title, When It's Darkness on the Delta, An American Reckoning. And I'm exploring 3 questions in this book. First, what are the policy, political, and cultural issues that have disadvantaged the people of the Mississippi Delta? And second, what are the myths that keep us from seeing those? And then what role does race play in shaping those myths? Now, while many think of the Delta as the birthplace of the blues and a place of mind-numbing poverty, as I write, my goal is to get readers to understand the historical forces that created this place, as well as how those forces are American at their core and not merely Southern. This is a personal book as well, since my father moved to the Delta in 1949. When he arrived there, he was working with farmers who had moved from sharecropping to being landowners. And he saw a tremendous amount of promise in this place. But in the wake of the murder of Emmett Till, he began to feel something different. And what he began to feel was fear for his family and fear that we would not survive there, which is why we moved to our farm in South Mississippi soon after. But as I've interviewed people who knew my father, I know he never wanted to leave the Delta. And that explains why he took me there every year, and it is why I am now writing about this place some have called the most southern place on earth. So in a way, the book that I am writing now is trying to complete some of the work that my father began there in 1949. While I'm doing reporting for this book, I'm also connecting with the Delta landscape by walking its fields and levees. I've gone on several canoe trips on the Mississippi River to connect with the body of water that shaped the very land that I walk. An intimate connection with the Delta's landscape doesn't erase the past or its problems. Encountering a place many claim to know, but few choose to understand, leads not only to lasting memories, but also to a deeper understanding of the country. To change what we as Americans see on the Delta's landscape, I believe we must change what we know about that place. I've been doing that by walking fields, levees, sacred spaces like Grayball Landing, where Emmett Till's body was found. Connecting with the land, for me, is like finding another source in an archive. Now, each time I enter an archive, I can't wait to get to the boxes and start to read through the folders and to see what I find. Working in archives really stirs up the detective and sleuth in me, since I never know what I'm going to stumble across in a folder or what connection I will make that will help me figure out a piece of the puzzle that I'm exploring in my writing. But thinking about place and the southern landscape as an archive now stirs up the same sense of discovery and anticipation. Now, although I'm a writer who leans on archival sources, I've come to enjoy creating my own archive by exploring place. This has really become central to my work as a writer. A place can sometimes help you see how the historical and lived experiences intersect as much as a physical document, since a place forces you to be descriptive as well as to provide historical background. But perhaps most important, using place as an archival source forces you as a writer to paint the picture on the page of what you see as much as what you are thinking. And it is that picture on the page that perhaps both the reader and the writer can begin to seek out a place called home. But what is home? That's a question that each of us must ask and discover on our own. I've found my two homes, yet I keep searching to understand those places. Everyone needs to find a place where we belong, but also feel at peace in the world. While I write as a spiritual necessity, I hope that people who read my work will think about their own spiritual journey toward a place that they can also call home. Thank you. Yes?
I'll ask a question just to get the ball rolling. My class, one of the things we're talking about and thinking a lot about is what is home and how we define home. And you just said we all need to find a place where we belong. What does belonging mean to you?
Belonging means that I feel I can be myself. I don't have to put on a facade at all. I think I'm a bit of a chameleon because I'm someone who's kind of lost their southern accent. That, you know, if I were in Mississippi right now, you'd hear a very different me. And once my daughter heard me kind of lapse into my southern accent, she said, "Stop that." And my best friend from college says, "You know, honey, he doesn't do that unless he's really comfortable." And I think it's that place where you feel really, somewhere you feel you can be all of the selves that you are. And that's what I think we all are looking for. And when I was growing up in Mississippi, I didn't feel I could do that there. I feel I can do that now. But a lot of my students don't feel that right now. And this is why, you know, the question they often ask me is, should I leave? And I say, yes, you should. Well, should I ever come back? I said, only if you have something you want to do here. And it has to be something that you want to do. And that's really why I'm back. I have something that I want to do. I have unfinished business. So that's, you know, either I'm trying to make the place feel as if I belong, but I'm also thinking about how other people, like my students, who don't feel comfortable there, making a place where they can also feel comfortable. Yes?
You mentioned while you were talking that when you write about a place, you don't want to talk too much about like memories and nostalgic stuff. How do you avoid that when you're writing about a place that you came from?
You do the nostalgia in your journal. And then after you're writing in your journal, you go back and you realize, that's pretty sappy. And you play, and then you ask yourself hard questions about what you write. But you know, you do have to do that. You do. There are moments where you do get kind of sad and emotional about that. I mean, this photograph right here it's a hard one for me to look at because that's a photograph that I actually took out of a family album the day my father died. And that's me when I was 10 years old. It was on my 10th birthday. But I write about that photograph very differently now. And what it made me begin to think about is what happened on that day. And what I remember, my father took the day off from work, which he didn't do very often. And we did nothing on our farm. And this is kind of in a very busy time in the summer. And that was so rare. It wasn't the nostalgia for that moment, but it was realizing that I had something really special happen to me that day, that maybe, and why did that happen? And maybe it's because that's why I took that out of that album. But sometimes it is hard for me to look at it because those memories come back. But now I'm looking at it, my dad has been dead for, gosh, more than nearly 50 years. So it's just, it's hard, but you have to work through it. So I think some of it's like grief. Grief is also fear. And we have to confront our fears. Yes?
You mentioned that you were born here in Mississippi and you traveled elsewhere. What kind of experiences, if you had any particular experiences that made you realize, okay, I have to go back to Mississippi, I have unfinished business?
I think it was really the Sovereignty Commission files, really, kind of picking up the New York Times and seeing this story about the Sovereignty Commission. Then going home one night and going to the website of Mississippi ACLU and typing in my parents' name and seeing them pop up on the screen and trying to figure out what landed them there. And that's what really got me to go back. And it was 10 years between a visit there where my wife and I had been run off a road in rural Mississippi. And she said, I'm never coming back here again. And I didn't go back either, but then I felt that need, I had to go back. And I'm glad I went back, but now I'm there, 9 months out of the year. I'm back home once a month. But I feel it's what I have to do. When I went back to Mississippi, I remember one thing my wife said to me is that there's so much there that has been undone from when you were a child. Maybe somehow through what you're doing, you can help kind of bring some of that back, or at least bring awareness to that. And that's what I see is what I have to do. I head up an oral history project that's about the work of about 89 black students who were arrested on the campus of the University of Mississippi in 1970. If you were black on the campus that night in February 26, 1970, you were arrested. And half of them were put in the penitentiary at Parchment. 8 of them were expelled. Now I'm there telling their story, collecting their oral histories, doing documentation of the 27 demands they put against the administration and trying to figure out exactly what else needs to be done. And that's, for me, great work in addition to just my writing and my teaching. So, other questions? Yes?
I noticed throughout your talk you have special connections, like the idea of place. Can you speak of like when you first consciously realized like a place can be an archive or like the special things connected with the concept of place?
I'd say it's really working on a place like Mississippi. It was really going, there are 2 things that really had an impact on me. This is on the same trip. I went to that place at Highway 49, at that pier that Natasha Trethewey writes about in Theories of Time and Space. And that same day, I did an interview with the writer Jessamine Ward. And I did that interview in the town of DeLisle, where she lives. And she's a writer who has never really left Mississippi. She's left, but she's come back. She's still very much rooted in the place where she grew up. And I kept asking her, I said, why do you stay here? And then she said to me, do you smell that eggy smell in the air? I said, yes. Do you feel that warm breeze? I said, yes. She said, that's like an embrace. I can't leave that. And that's when I realized, that moment, that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure this out through the way that these writers look at the place itself, how they feel about it, and then also how I feel about it, and maybe what it is that I see, and trying to blend those together. So it was those 2 experiences that really kind of did that for me. Yes?
I have a question for maybe like sort of thinking of our students and the kind of writing they might want to do if they're not from Mississippi, for better or worse. If they want to write about their own place, especially after hearing you talk tonight. How would you suggest they start?
I would say, think about a place that means something to you. What is it that you see there? Then try to excavate maybe what it is you don't know. Maybe some difficult things about that place, and coming to terms with that. As I mentioned in my craft talk, how many New Englanders do I have in the audience tonight? Mostly New Englanders in this audience. How many non-New Englanders? Yeah, I think the New Englanders win here. I'm saying that my friend, literary critic Michael Gora, says that there's not been a literature of New England since the 19th century. And I think it's maybe because New Englanders have not explored the place as much as they should. And maybe that's kind of my challenge to all of you students from New England, is to kind of explore this place. Robert Frost did it. And I don't think that New England writers are doing that maybe enough. And it would be nice to kind of see this kind of resurgence of a literature of New England. Because New England is an important place. It's an important place in American history. But I think we haven't gotten beyond Lexington and Concord. We stay in the glory days of New England. We don't think about the great New England present. And somehow I think maybe New Englanders need to begin to explore that. So it's not just the South that you can explore place. I visit northern Michigan almost every summer. I have a friend who lives up there. And it's the most southern place in the north I've ever been. I see more Confederate flags in northern Michigan than I see in Mississippi. So that's just it. Explore the place you're from and dig deep into it. Ask really hard questions about it. And think about what lies beneath the surface of what you're looking at.